Mai haere mai ki te leihui o tātou o te kaunihira arohe o te matau a Māui mō tēnei marama o Hongongoi. So just a warm welcome to everyone to our Regional Council meeting this July. So to start our hui, may I ask Matua Mike to open us with another karakia for the day. Kia ora.
Just getting my pronunciation.
Ka pai ira.
Sounded pretty good.
So kia ora koutou. So yes, thank you, General Chairwoman. Anyway, Ormsby, this is our second karakia for the day. So hopefully the second time around will be a lot louder than the first time. Inoi tātou.
Whakataka
pahau
ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tōna. Kia mā kina ki uta. Kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te ātakura. He sio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Mauri ora.
Kia ora tātou.
Matua Mike, and a warm welcome again. Do we have apologies? I'd like to note Councillor Hawke, who is currently in Christchurch representing Hawke's Bay Regional Council at the LGNZ conference. Di and I will be leaving at 3 p.m. to join him. Do we have any other apologies?
Not so much an apology, Madam Chair, just a notice. I have to leave by 2:30 for AGM.
Thank you, Mike. I believe Tanya Hopmans is late, so I'll just note that. Okay, if that is all, I'm happy to move those. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Sears. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Moving through our agenda. Housekeeping. So in an event of an earthquake, drop under the Tipu, hold, and then retreat up to Tiffin Park, up Napier Hill. If the fire alarms go off, we exit at the closest exit and meet on the grass area at the front. And toilets are to the right outside the doors of the chamber, and we have our online streaming for this meeting. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare for today's items? There are none. Confirmation of minutes from the 19th of July last week. Are there any additions, alterations to be made to those minutes? There are none. Can I have a mover, please? Yep. Councillor Harding, Councillor Van Beek. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Call for minor items not on the agenda. Thank you. There are none. Let's head into our decision items. Annual plan, our annual plan adoption for 2023-24. Can I please invite Susie, Sarah,
Andrew.
and Andrew? Thank you. Nick, would you like to introduce and then hand over to the team?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and through you, just to introduce the annual plan, and an annual plan perhaps adopted under particularly trying circumstances through this year. So thank you to councillors for your feedback into the process, and I hope we've got to a place where we've got an annual plan that takes account of the recovery that we're in the midst of, but is also as reasonable as we can make it in terms of the costs that are then imposed on the community. In terms of the process to now, part of adopting your annual plan is that we get a legal check on the process that we've been through and the resolutions or the recommendations that we've been through today. So that work has been completed, and I'll hand over to Andrew to take you through the item.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou. Tata. So as Nick alluded to, it's very unusual to be presenting an annual plan in such a hurry. And as a consequence, some of the things have been out of sequence. So we got the legal review done on the paper last night, and some amendments to the recommendations have come through. And we're also still doing a deep dive on some of the actual specific numbers in the plan itself. So I apologise for the inconvenience around this, but this is what we have. So the headline items in the paper are probably all quite familiar to you. I mean, unplanned and rising costs due to the cyclone and inflationary pressures, a lot of uncertainty, particularly around funding, what the recommendations might be coming out of reviews, and then what the actual work is that we need to do subsequent to that. And so our response to all of that is that we have been through a process of cutting costs as much as we possibly can, reprioritising. Of course, you've been involved in all of this, scaling back on some programs, deferring some other programs, and then borrowing, leveraging our balance sheet to meet some of the shortfall as well as introducing the recovery charge. So that's the key points that I'd make there. In terms of the recommendations, the new recommendations that we've added to the paper last night, the recommendation 3, that it's around the unbalanced budget, which I'll go through in a moment, and recommendation 4 around the inconsistency between borrowing and the policy settings, and 7, 8, 9, so approving of the borrowing delegation for negotiating loans and setting of the fees and charges.
Andrew, I'll just stop there just to ensure that all our members, councillors, have those new recommendations in front of them, and if not, we can have them put up on the screen.
Would be helpful to have them on the screen.
Yeah, could we please have them up on the screen?
Big screen. Read them alongside the paper.
Oh, can we do that?
And I'll get somebody up here to run the mouse.
You're on the mail.
Change.
Scroll down.
But before we go into the detail of that, Andrew, we'd like to just ensure that we are confident in our compliance obligations per the LGA in terms of the changes to the recommendations.
So the change recommendations are really as a result of closer examination of the LGA. So section 100, section 101, and section 80 are all the relevant sections referred to here. So if we start, I guess, with the unbalanced budget, which is the new recommendation 3 here, the test that we have to follow here is section 100 of the Local Government Act, where in subsection 2 there, where if we are recommending an unbalanced budget, then we have to explain why. So there are 4 tests in the paper there. So talking about it's really common sense, essentially. Like, are you unbalanced for a good reason? And in our case, the good reason is that we have additional costs, and that those costs are actually creating long-term value. So that's fundamentally what those tests are. Recommendation 4, the relevant act there is the relevant section there is section 80 of the Local Government Act, which the test there is that we have to note that inconsistency, which is what we are doing here, and that we have to note the reasons for that inconsistency, and what our next step is, basically, what our intent is to change that policy in future. So that's really what we're outlining in recommendation 4 there.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Andrew. The question I've got is that the Section 100 test relates to operating revenues. And essentially, as I understand it, 13 million of the borrowing is for capital asset programs, where the borrowing, despite being for capital assets, is by accounting standards treated as operating expenditure. So in fact, it's not as unbalanced as it might otherwise appear to be in real terms. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even further to that, you know, the notion of an unbalanced budget suggests that things don't balance, but actually they do balance. It's just that we're not allowed to count the loan funding in
Operating revenue.
in operating revenue. Yeah.
Right, any other questions, clarifications?
Just one minor technical thing. I noted the reference to the Schedule 2, the fees and charges schedule. There's no corresponding notation on that schedule document. So my question is, are those fees and charges is the schedule incorporated into the plan per se, or is it an addition outside of the document? Can we include Schedule 2 actually in the document?
It was a mistake. It should have said attachment.
So in the annual plan document, we have a section which refers to fees and charges, and we refer the reader to our website to the charges that we've published there. So we did this for the first time last financial year as well, so this is not a new thing. We did do this for the 22-23 financial year. So the schedule is essentially part of the plan. And the recommendation from legal was that by including a specific resolution, that we are adopting the fees and charges schedule as part of the annual plan and referring to them in the minutes of this meeting, that would suffice as capturing them all together.
Leanne?
Sorry, so, apologies. Through you, Chair, so the reference to Schedule 2 is a mistake in the paper, and it should have been a reference to Attachment 2. And then what will happen is in the minutes, we can't have a resolution that refers to something that's not in the minutes. So it will be sets the fees and charges for the two, blah, 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 set out following, and that full set of fees and charges will go into the resolution in the minutes.
Can someone interpret that for me? What is the Schedule 2 going to be included in the document, but it's not going to be called Schedule 2? Is that just...
No, it was referred to as Schedule 2 in the recommendations in the paper, in the agenda item, and it should have referenced Attachment 2. And because a resolution needs to be able to stand alone, once it goes into the minutes, it will actually have the whole of that Attachment 2 as part of the resolution.
Well, the reference in the paper talks about fees and charges schedule as opposed to Schedule 2. So to be precise about this, what reference will be made? Why does Schedule 2 come into Recommendation 9? Does that need to be deleted?
It's an error.
So it needs to be deleted from...
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Nick?
No, that's fine, that's been solved.
Just further to that, so my understanding is in regards to that particular item there, that it will be available, the public will be directed to the to the online version to understand what those charges are. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all clear. Councillor Harding?
Thank you, Chair. Look, just a question around the detail of the annual plan, but it's a big question.
and it's around reserves. So just looking for some indication from staff, please. And by the way, congratulations on a really top product and really, really difficult circumstances. And I recognise that there's so much uncertainty in our situation that all of this stuff has to be taken as provisional and a best guess. But there is a question, a valid question to ask around the intention around reserves, and specifically the regional disaster damage reserve, which is 3.3 million. This is page 33, note 8, council reserve fund. So we've got 3.3 million in the regional disaster damage reserve, which is established to meet commercial insurance excess, and we know that that is going to be a feature. An uninsured portion of edge protection, so that would seem to be available as well, and $5 million in scheme disaster damage reserve, so designed to meet insurance excesses as well. So there's 8.3, is it? $1 million sitting there, and in the scheme of things, it'd be nice to know what staff's intentions are for that, please.
So Andrew alluded to deep dives into the numbers still. This is one we've just discovered is incorrect in the reserve movements. So it's got us there as depositing $1 million into each of those reserves we're actually drawing in this annual plan. So we will need to work through that and fix that in the statements.
Okay. Just a supplementary question, what's the general approach to the reserves? Is it a case of that they are apportioned to specific assets, and a case of working through which assets have been impaired and which portion of those reserves can be applied? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, so it will be specific to so there's two different types of the reserves. So there's the scheme disaster damage reserve, and that will be more specific to the schemes, and the other one is more region-wide.
Okay, so we will be applying portions of those reserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or clarifications for this item?
That was a pretty stunning revelation.
Happy to move, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can I please have a seconder to to approve the recommendations 1 to 9, noting the correction that needs to be made?
To item 9.
Yep. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Harding. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, briefly, Madam Chair, but firstly to congratulate one and all staff involved in what is a marathon effort to get this document to where it is today, and under extreme duress and circumstance. The annual plan, as we've got in front of us, and the associated calculations must have been an absolute nightmare for the team, having to step in and make major reductions in expenditure to calculate in the resources needed to recover, and then to cope complexity on complexity with changed accounting principles and approaches. It must have been a true nightmare. Andrew, thank you so much for stepping in at the last hour. Amy, it's tremendous effort on all in the team. We've ended up with a document that is supposedly unbalanced, but I don't accept that for one moment. It's a document that recognises the critical nature of the world we're in at this present time. One of the things that I've really appreciated in this process, and I've gone back to staff and raised questions with them and had very professional responses made at every turn, and I'm so delighted with that. I can see that we've gone back, checked our processes, we've confirmed that we're on the right track. We can have confidence that we've got robust numbers behind both the rate setting, and there's a further document to come to set those rates. But in the meantime, we've had our fees and charges issues resolved. We're confident about what they look like, and we know that they are robust. So I think we need to just leave the congratulations with the team across the board for coming up with a result that we can we can live with for the coming year, in the knowledge that for the long-term plan, there's the opportunity to make those improvements, bring about changes, etc. But I'm satisfied that we've got a sufficient document to put in front of the public. So thanks so much for one and all involved.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Councillor Harding.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, just briefly, I'd just like to acknowledge the 87 submitters who found the time in these busy and extraordinary times to submit on the annual plan, and notably a very strong representation from the equestrian sector, which hasn't gone unheard. No gems, no additional gems in here for them, but we're certainly building back assets that they can benefit from as soon as we can, and looking to the future around our flood assets to build in more recreational opportunities for the community broadly. So I'm happy to support this.
Thank you. Any other speakers? There are none. All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you, team. We'll roll on to setting the rates for this financial year. Thank you. We've got Vanessa joining us as well. Thank you. Nick, would you like to introduce this paper?
Sure. Just to introduce this paper, councillors, I guess this is one of the fundamental tasks for you as councillors, is setting your annual rates. So again, it's something that's critically important for the operation of council, but it's something where we also need to ensure that a process that you've been through in setting your annual plan and then striking your rates is correct and withstands the scrutiny of the LGA. So in my view, that is the case here, and I commend the paper to you, but I'll let Andrew take you through the detail with help from Strategic Pay if needed.
Thank you. So I'll take the paper as read. The things I would like to draw your attention to, though, are that we did get the legal review on this paper. This was noted in the paper that we were getting the legal review subsequent to sending it out to you, and they have come back with some with five items that I'll just walk you through if that's okay.
Sure.
So the first one is 2.3.1, subsidised public transport. We just need to clarify that what we're talking about there is the urban areas of Napier excluding Bayview and the urban areas of Hastings including Havelock North. So that's the first point that was raised in the review. 2.3.4, which references central and southern area rivers and streams. We had a line in there for Rangatiki District with a $0 rate, and technically there's no such thing as a zero rate, so that needs to be taken out. 2.3.6.15, which is about the Opuho drainage scheme. The calculation factor is per rating unit, and we're updating the annual plan to match that. So just a slight mismatch there that we're doing. 2.4.2 around coastal hazards. The calculation number here needs to be 5 decimal places, so it should actually say 3.27106, which is what's in the annual plan. So again, it's just a matching item. Mm-hmm. And 0.5 around rates penalties. The note there is that the rates penalties will be struck at 5 p.m. on that day. That's what gets us within the window. So that's what came back from the legal review.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Tanya, kia ora Tanya, welcome. Do you mind muting? Can we mute you? Multitasking. Any questions for Andrew on that legal advice?
Tanya's got a question. She's just coming out.
She's typing it out.
Not on the legal advice, I just had a question on the paper.
Sure, we'll head into that. Yep. Councillor Williams?
Look, sort of train spotting, and I'm actually following in the footsteps of our esteemed chair and asking this question at 2.3.6.21. Should the reference by Hastings District be for the Mara Tōtara flood control scheme land value?
Which one?
2.3.6.21, is that it?
It's based on location and land value, but in the,
Marae Tōtara.
it says Hastings District rate set on capital value.
Just having a look at that.
What page are you on, Mark?
16.
I don't know.
16 at the bottom. 16.
Yeah, 2.3.6.20.
2-1.
2-1.
21.
2-1.
21, yeah, 0.21. Marae Tōtara.
Excuse me, is that in the table?
Yes,
And
page
I
16.
think it's a,
We've just been given about 6 paragraphs at pace, which are all assumed we could find. I'm just asking about one. 2.3.6.21.
So it is correct at capital value, it's just should say capital value there rather
Okay.
than land value in the.
So the heading's wrong.
Yes.
the heading is
Heading's
wrong, yeah.
Yes. Thank you. We'll make that correction in the.
Good boy, good spotting, councillor.
Any other questions for the team on the paper?
Could the team perhaps just check that there's nothing else like that in there?
Oh, there are none. So please have a mover for those recommendations. Would we like them up on the board? Pretty straightforward. Okay.
Fit along. Yeah.
I'm happy to move.
The move, thank you. And a seconder, please.
I'm happy to see you.
Councillor Harding, would you like to speak any further? There's no more speakers? No. Okay. Oh, well, the recommendations are there. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
All those against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, team. Now we're moving on to item 7, the Regional Planning and Māori Committee Appointees Remuneration Review.
I'm happy to speak to that, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you. And we've got strategic pay there with us as well. Thank you.
Ai, te tuatahi ko tāku mihi kia koe rahi mikaere, nau nei whakarite tātou, just acknowledging Mike for starting our second karakia today.
Protected.
So the paper is as it reads, Chair, but I'm happy to actually just highlight a few points. And with your indulgence, we have strategic pay, Kathy Hendry. And in amongst our audience today, we also have our Chair, Tania Hopmans, for Regional Planning Committee. We have Katarina Kawana, the Co-Chair for Māori Committee, online. And Tai Tinana mai, in physical presence, we have Michael Paku. This report here relates to a remuneration review across the Regional Planning Committee and also the Māori Committee. Interesting to note that in the Māori Committee space, the last review of remuneration was done in 2018. In terms of the Regional Planning Committee, that was done in 2019. The terms of reference for the Regional Planning Committee requires that it be done at the earliest opportunity in the new triennium, so we're running a wee bit late. Strategic pay were put forward in front of both committees, and there was a decision made to run with strategic pay as the independent and to do this simultaneously across both Māori Committee and across Regional Planning Committee. In the background part of the paper, you'll note that well, it's well set out there in terms of the process they've gone through, and if you had a chance to get to the appendices to this paper, you would have noted across both Māori Committee and also Regional Planning Committee that the State Services Commission Cabinet Fees Framework was used as a context within which to determine that. The consultation has been fully engaged in terms of both committees. In terms of the Māori Committee, they elected a particular group who are going to participate in that process with strategic pay. You will see under the consultation part of the paper just the extent of which consultation has taken place. Can I outline under financial and resource implications that's subject to your decision here as council? The recommendations will have a minor impact upon council's budgeted costs. And that's probably all I'll highlight, notwithstanding the recommendations to go. But I'd just like to pass, if you're okay, Chair, to Kathy Hendry to see if there's anything she'd like to add, being the independent body that undertook the remuneration review. Kia ora, Kathy.
Kia ora, thank you for having me on board. Sure, just in the context of the two, I think firstly the Regional Planning Committee, we had previously done this review in 2019, and based on the discussions and our review of the current environment, it was our opinion that the methodologies and the assumptions we'd made were very similar. And so we applied that again through the methodologies, and that's resulted in an uplift, just as the various methodologies that we used. With regards to the Maori Committee, we hadn't previously, as far as I'm aware, we hadn't previously looked at that committee before. So we did consider using similar methodologies to what we had done with the Regional Planning Committee, noting that it is a different framework. It does operate slightly differently. And so we've tried to consider our recommendation based on what was currently in place in terms of the fees, and also lent on what we've seen in practice at similar type of tangata whenua committees at other councils too. So that's the sort of premise for how we went about the review and the recommendations, and you'll see in the report that the co-chairs of the Maori Committee is linked to the recommendation of the RPC. And I'm very happy to answer questions that you might have, assuming if you've read through the reports, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Kathy. That gives a broad background of how we have come here, noting that we've had two separate processes for the RPC and the Māori Committee, resulting in a per annum type fee versus a per meeting fee.
That's correct.
And that this has been an independent review by Strategic Pay. Okay.
Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Mike, kia ora.
Thank you, Kathy. Really appreciate the work that Strategic Pay have put into this. And you are correct, this is the first time for the Māori Standing Committee that we've used Strategic Pay. I forget the organisation we used last time, but bringing them in line with not only with the RPC, but the council in general was one of the things that the committee took into consideration. So we had consistency across the organisation. I do note that within the recommendations, there's no uplift for the committee fee per se for our members. That has remained stagnant. Can you just give me a bit of context around that?
Perhaps I could
jump
in there. In relation to that, because as part of the review and using the State Services Commission Cabinet fee, the fee actually came out at $435 as part of that analysis, but the recommendation from Strategic Pay, and which is supported by the officers of HPRC, is that it remain at $452.
Kathy, would you like to add any further to that?
Yeah, I think that was correct. When we looked at the per meeting fee, we felt that the State Services Commission framework was the most appropriate. In running through that, the per meeting fee came out higher than the state services. And as a result of feedback and also in consideration, we felt that it made more sense to keep it stagnant and allow the state services freeze framework to catch up. But we also considered anecdotally, well, we considered the fees in relation to other fees we've seen for per meetings and felt that they were fair and reasonable and at the upper end of what we've seen. So felt that having those two checks in place, both the state services as well as our knowledge of other councils, felt that keeping them at their current rate made the most sense.
So this is not a reflection on the quality of the work, but more the framework that was used this time versus
Absolutely.
the previous
Yes.
time.
Correct. Yes.
Not to say that our committee members won't see it that way, but at least we have some understanding around how that was arrived at.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Just one further question, Kathy. As part of the terms of reference in setting the size and scope of this particular body of work, absolutely agree with the methodology in regards that was used, the engagement that took place. It was, and I appreciate that the cyclone may have got in the way of this. There was an intention that you would come back to those that participated within that review in regards to your initial findings and some feedback from us in regards to that. To my recollection, we didn't get to that part. I was wondering if that was actually a result of the cyclone jumping in the way there. I know that we did have to push the timeframes for this body of work out as a consequences of the cyclone. Have I got that right?
Yes, but we did, not entirely, so we did share the feedback back in a draft report and seeked feedback. I did offer at the time to come along to a meeting and discuss it too, but we didn't receive, I think you were the only person we received feedback from. So we did extend the period for feedback, and I believe that the report was circulated amongst all parties, but I'll just need to check. But yeah, it was circulated in draft for feedback and review, but we only received your feedback.
Yes, I think I struggled to remember seeing the draft per se, but that's fine.
Okay. Okay.
I'm very familiar with strategic pay's methodology and how things are achieved. So I get that. Might have been just a bit helpful and part of that agreed process.
Part of that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Through you, Chair, the drafts for both committees were circulated on the 8th of June, and then that was extended through to the 7th of July.
Thank you.
But that's right in the midst of recovery, of course.
Yep.
Just finally, not so much for, nothing more for you, Kathy, but just in regards for the councillors per se, this hasn't made its way to the Māori committee, advisory committee as yet, the Māori Standing Committee as yet. So they are unaware of this. So they haven't had the opportunity to view this or comment on it. That would be my only final words.
Do you have further advice on?
We are meeting on the 2nd of August. We have a scheduled Māori Standing Committee meeting. I do note that it has been agreed by all parties that wherever we land on this will take effect from the 1st of June.
That's right.
So that's all been agreed to.
Okay.
As I said, the final position, that's just in front of you today, but remembering when you're in your considerations, this has not been taken back to the party that it actually affects.
Yes. So this being a council decision, but being very mindful of there being eyes over, or a better word, of the final report, what would your advice be in terms of the sequence of this, given it is a council decision?
So perhaps it could be put on hold for a month while it goes through the various committees to get that feedback, because we've all agreed It doesn't take effect till the 1st of June. We've gone way past that. It doesn't really matter.
Oh, we've got 1st of July in the,
1st of July.
1st of July
Sorry.
in the notes.
Yes, of course, it's financial year.
Yes.
Yep. So let it lay on the table for that period of a month while at least we get it in front of at least the Māori, I will only speak for the Māori Standing Committee.
Yes.
We can get it in front of the Māori Standing Committee.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think be wise to take your advice, given you are the chair of that committee.
Chair,
Yes.
we do have Tanya Hopmans on in respect to the Regional Planning Committee.
Okay, absolutely. We'll head over to you, Tanya, for your feedback or questions in terms of the RPC remuneration recommendations.
Tēnā tātou, kia ora Kathy. So I'm a little bit the same position as Mike. I'm aware that we did receive a draft and that we did have a meeting of our tangata whenua members to briefly discuss it. Unfortunately, now I can't remember exactly why, but we only had a few available for that meeting. And there were some important questions that they wanted to pass on to you, Kathy, and I apologise that they hadn't been passed on earlier, but I think it is really important that we have an opportunity to discuss that. Just like we did, prior to you commencing this work or getting into this work, you had a meeting with us and we had a real full committee discussion there, at quite a lengthy discussion around making sure that we were following the terms of reference guidelines as to how this should be done. And there are a couple of things in here that raised question marks around the process. So I think it would be good if we could resolve that. And my request to the councillors is that we make sure that the process was done properly and that the terms of reference requirements are actually really clearly spelt out, including what is not in there, so that when we get the recommendations, we can agree that the process has led us to the right recommendations. So I don't think we've quite landed it, and I'd like an opportunity for our tangata whenua members to meet with Kathy and her team like we did prior to the report, to go through the methodology and just make sure that some of the concerns they've got are actually addressed. And again, that might be explained through that discussion, but I want to make sure that the process is done properly, because the last time we did it, the process wasn't, and James Palmer basically just in discussion with the co-chairs came up with a figure, and we agreed that for expediency that's what we'd do. So the last report was not a template that we should follow. That was one of the things we discussed at our meeting. So yes, to the chair of our council, we would like to have the ability to meet, and we can do that quite quickly so that we can make sure that the report we have a meeting also with Kathy, and then that the report's finalised and provided to council at its, in time for its next meeting, if we're agreeable there.
Thank you for your advice on that, Tanya. Given it isn't time sensitive, it sounds like that this could be deferred as an item until the process has been completed, and those committees have had time to digest the final report. So are there any other views on that deferral? No? Councillor Harding?
Sorry, Chair, not a view on the deferral. I'm happy with that, but just with Kathy here is just an opportunity to use her wisdom and get insight now into the draft proposal as it is. Look, and I want to preface my question by the observation that nobody in governance is working less hard post cyclone than they were pre-cyclone. And I really want to acknowledge the huge efforts that everyone around this table and other tables put in to our community. So nothing, please don't read anything into my questions that in any way questions the value of people's contributions. But it is an opportunity for me at least, and maybe some other of my colleagues, to understand why there is a difference between the Māori Committee And what's the fundamental driver of the difference between how Māori committee is paid versus the RPC, where the RPC has a fixed fee, where the Māori committee hasn't? Is that just an artefact of history? First question. The other question is, in the context, and it's relevant to that, to the answer to that, is that in the context of where we are now, the RPC, and both with the cyclone response and the Kotahi plan, the workload of the RPC appears to be lower, and although everyone's busy doing other things. So I'm trying to understand whether those two questions are relevant to each other. But just what's the genesis of the difference in the way the two committees are treated, please?
Kiri, can I direct to you initially?
My understanding from all that I've read might be because one is statutorily based in regards to the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee Act 2015. The other one is a Schedule 7 as a committee under Schedule 7, subject to each triennium and the endorsement of our council.
So it may be that Kathy can explain whether that's something that drives the different pay structure or whether that's just a different background context.
Kathy, could you add to that, please?
Yes, sure. So I just noted Tanya's got her hand up as well. Yes, so the difference, we did originally consider whether we would recommend annual for the members. So just noting we've recommended annual fees for the co-chairs, but not for the members of the Māori committee. The main reason we opted for continuing on a per meeting fee basis for the members of the Māori committee was because there is the option for members to have others step in their place as well. I can't remember the actual term, but it's possible for another member to nominate someone else to step up for a period of time. And that made it a bit challenging to determine how we would deal with that in terms of an annual fee, considered that it had been a per meeting fee previously and it seemed to be working well. Whereas with the chairs, there's quite a different type of workload for the chairs, and we've tried to acknowledge that in the separation of the two fees. Again, we also do see a difference between the Māori committee and the RPC in terms of the legislative difference in how they operate, and so that's been reflected in how the fees have been determined too.
Tanya, would you like to add to that?
Kia ora, that's correct. I think the key here in terms of the difference is the Regional Planning Committee is a form of redress that is enshrined in statute, if you like. And at the time, the terms of reference were negotiated at the same time as the legislation was drafted, and they were intended to be read together. And so the terms of reference set out how various matters will be dealt with, including a review of or fee setting. And what was important there, and this is like one of the things we wanted to raise, was that it was expressly considered whether the State Services Commission fee setting framework was appropriate, and it wasn't considered to be appropriate, which is why it's not in the terms of reference in terms of what there is to take into account. And one of the things there is, even though the RPC makes recommendations to council in relation to plan changes, etc., even though it's phrased as a recommendation, the actual process is such that council can only accept or refer back any recommendations. So it's this cyclical thing, and in all my time, council has never made a decision that is different from a recommended decision of the RPC. And that was something to do with the politics at the time and someone called Rodney Hyde. And so even though it's stated as recommendatory, the tangata whenua members certainly don't see their role as being an advisory to the council, we see ourselves as being decision makers alongside councillors, because that's the net effect of what we do. That is different to the Māori committee. That's just one of the differences. So that's why from the perspective of the tangata whenua members, it's quite important to look at what is stated in the terms of reference and how fee setting is done. And it is to look at when comparing, to look at others who are making similar decisions in the resource management area. So quite specific and different to what State Services Commission is generally looking at. I hope that helps answer the question.
Kia ora, Tanya, that definitely clarifies things for me, thank you.
If I can, Madam Chair, and the Māori Standing Committee has been historical that there have been sitting fees.
Yes.
And right back to its conception.
If there are no other questions, we may be able to defer this if we're all in agreement. So if we can defer the decisions to the 30th of August meeting, noting that the Māori Committee and the RPC are able to complete the process and receive the report, which will then come to Council for decision making. All those who agree, say aye. Aye. Those against, carried.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we move on to our next item, the report and recommendations from the Climate Action Joint Committee. This was held on the 22nd of May. It was the first meeting that we had for the term. Councillor Hayley Brown from Napier City Council, she was appointed as the Deputy Chair alongside myself as Chair. Pippa or Nick, would you like to introduce and then hand it over to you, Pippa?
Through you, Chair, councillors, it's great to have a Climate Action Joint Committee in place, and for it to be composed of tangata whenua, the councils across the region, and I think an important initiative at a governance level as we collectively look to tackle the challenges of climate change. I'm not sure if you've all met Pippa before.
Yep, we all know Pippa.
You have?
Yep.
Cool. In which case, I'll just hand over to Pippa just to take you through any detail of the item around the final terms of reference.
Okay. Kia ora koutou. Well, really, you've seen these terms of reference before the first meeting of the Climate Action Joint Committee. There were two minor amendments requested to the terms of reference, so that's why they're coming back to you today to discuss and adopt. They're detailed there in point 3.1, 3.2. So changing the membership, rather than inviting two members from RPC, we've sent invites out to the PSGEs should they wish to appoint a member and an alternate if they would like to, and a minor change to the wording of the terms of reference in section 2.3, just removing a reference to planetary boundaries, which some of the members found that was referring to something too specific from a specific research group in the Stockholm Resilience Centre. So that really covers those amendments. If there are questions on, and then you have a couple of, just a report back from what we covered in that first meeting. So happy to take any questions or provide any further detail.
I'll just say that they were excellent presentations from Dr. Tom Logan, who was able to present a spatial-based tool that looked at overlaying hazards, risks and vulnerabilities to our infrastructure. So I highly recommend that the council be able to have that presentation provided as well. But it was very, very useful. Also from NIWA, we had the principal climate scientist, Dr. Sam Dean, present some fantastic graphics and animations around some of the return periods, but knowing that NIWA was still to present the council with that later on in the year in terms of those specifics. So I highly recommend that we get him back here as well. But that's just a brief summary of our day together in that Climate Action Group Committee. Are there any questions, particularly around the terms of reference changes or the paper itself? Tanya, do you have any questions? Carl? Okay. Zan, Councillor Harding, would you like to add anything from that meeting?
No, I think that's a reasonable summary. I'm happy to move, but I don't want to hog all the speaking time, so.
Please have a seconder to receive. Yep, thank you. Councillor Roadley, would you like to speak, Zan?
Yeah, look, just very briefly, I think it's a signal of the commitment of all of the Hawke's Bay councils that we managed to continue this work, and a tribute to the tenacity of Pippa to keep this going and keep her engagement with community experts, for want of a better word, panels, to try and continue to make progress with this. The counterfactual of stopping to making progress on climate change in the midst of a climate change influenced cyclone event would be ironic, to say the least, and let's hope we don't get there. So we just have to power on, keep going. Next step there is to look at regional emissions reductions. I look forward to that. Some challenging conversations around there about how we can engage with agriculture, transportation and stationary energy as our three biggest contributors regionally. But bring it on, let's have those conversations.
Thank you. Councillor Roadley?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just maybe to endorse what you had said around the presentation from Dr. Sam Dean. Loved that. It was so graphic and, yeah, highly looking forward, or very much looking forward to that coming to us all later in the year. It was great.
He has provided some of those animations, so I think I can probably share those already. I think, so Dr. Sam Dean is part of the World Weather Attribution Research Network. So he's part of NIWA, that's an international network though. It's a rapid review that they have released, and so I think they're looking to get that peer reviewed and go through the proper research processes and then come back to you.
Any other speakers? With the none, all those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Thanks, Pippa. We head on to the terms of reference for the Hawke's Bay CDM Joint Committee. Would you like to lead us, Nick? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, we're seeing a move in civil defence nationally to better embrace partnerships and work with tangata whenua across the country. The move to do that nationally has somewhat stalled, although the legislation was introduced to Parliament. It hasn't yet found its way out of Parliament. My understanding is that the Joint Committee here has looked to proactively move ahead of that and has looked to revise its terms of reference in order to be inclusive of mana whenua interests across the region. And the attached terms of reference are essentially the update to do that with the changes highlighted in red and blue. So that's probably all from me in terms of an introduction. I'll just check with Leanne in her governance role if she's got anything else to add.
Unless anyone has questions, that's
Okay. Thank you. And just supporting what Dr. Nick has said, there's been this historical not quite fit for purpose ability for tangata whenua in a voting capacity on these types of joint committees. Now, the emergency management bill looks to rectify that, but in anticipation of that happening, the invitation was last meeting put to the tangata whenua groups as specified in these terms of reference. They know that it is non-voting at present until that bill is changed. Which we are hopeful and to be able to submit along those lines to support those changes. So are there any questions? Thank you, Councillor Curtin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want clarification as to whether the legislation actually enables advisory membership.
Leanne? I'd suspect so if the paper has gone through the joint committee for this.
I would have to go and find out. Sorry, I don't know the answer.
Can we get back to you on that, Councillor Curtin? And if it needs to be rectified, it will come back to council. If it's otherwise.
Sorry, just the second question, Madam Chair, at 6.4, tangata whenua representation. Can you give us a bit of a rationale as to the selection of the post-treaty settlement representation? Was there another model in terms of, for example, tai whenua, other models, if you like, of representation considered?
Yeah, it was identified and acknowledged those who have been heavily involved in the response, particularly after Cyclone Gabrielle. So the rationale was to invite PSG's e Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi, who does cover it all here, inviting them with an understanding of practicality around membership. So that's why the conclusion was to invite those members. As we know, terms of reference can be changed to fit a new situation or environment, but this is a very good start and covers it all here in terms of the response that we're dealing with.
If I can just add to that, Madam Chair, so we've gone from none to having representation, which is a huge improvement. I do take on board Councillor Curtin's point in regards to the makeup, but suffice to say that as post-settlement entity groups, by their very nature, receive their mandate from the same people that tai whenua received their mandate from. So if you like, they're not a separate group or a separate iwi, they are exactly us, representing us at this body. The other part here is that Ngāti Kahungunu, by its constitution, so we have mana whenua and we have tangata whenua, as Ngāti Kahungunu recognises mātā waka within their constitution. So that's all Māori who live in the region. So there's good coverage for all Māori. Kia ora. And with that, I bid you all farewell.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any other questions, clarifications?
Madam Chair, I've just got I'd like to just offer an amendment to 7.2 of the terms of reference, and it's simply to add at the end, but must provide a report to that local authority within 30 days of each meeting. So some measure of, if you like, responsiveness to the territorial authority.
So that's a report of the joint committee's meetings.
That's correct.
As an information item back to the council.
The originating.
Yep. I see many benefits in that. So unless there are any views to suggest otherwise, right. If we can include that amendment, please, in the recommendations. Yes. Any other comments or questions? If there are none, could I please have a mover for those recommendations? Councillor Curtin, with your addition. Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Bowley, would you like to speak any further?
I do want to speak to this, Madam Chair. It's something that has worried and vexed me for a long time. One of the things that I'm pleased to see is tangata whenua and now understand mana whenua representation there. That to me is as a critical element in the joint committee moving forward. The only concern I have is the non-voting nature of that membership, and I think we need to. I'm pleased to see legislation hopefully overturning that impediment to full participation by the mana whenua, tangata whenua. The other aspect, though, that I think ought to be closely considered is the representation around the table, hopefully with voting rights as well, of community groups with a strong degree of interest in this. My view is that the legislation that going back to 2003, followed by changes made in 2013 and 2016, are totally inadequate. I won't say totally. The model that's promoted right throughout is flawed, and it was demonstrated to be significantly flawed in this latest event. What we've got is a joint committee administered, if you like, or governed by the leaders of the community, our chair and mayors, supported by the chief executives, all who have far too much to do than to be dedicating the resource that needs to be dedicated to this particular very important infrastructure in the community. My view is that the model needs drastically changing so that the governors remain outside of the operational entity. They govern, but sitting inside of that are those with the greatest interest and expertise to manage this entire commitment to the community. And those, I couldn't think of better nominees for that to be mana whenua, tangata whenua, and those interested groups, led and supported by some real professionals in civil defence and emergency. So when you think about it, in my view, it has the equivalence of putting the mayors and chairs and chief executives in charge of building stop banks. They don't have the expertise to build stop banks. We have professionals to do that, and we provide that governance infrastructure. The model doesn't make sense, never did, and we've landed in this situation where we've got an inadequate, underperforming civil defence and emergency response in the region, and that needs radical change. My suggestion, Madam Chair, is that in your role as chair of a joint committee, that we get on and set the rules and infrastructure underneath that structure now in advance of hopefully changed legislation, and build those community resilience groups that are starting to pop up in the community. I think our colleague Sandra from Hastings District has got the right idea. Build that community base and give them the resources to do it. I think we can get ahead of this game, provide the resilience for the community, but get on with it. This is one small step towards that, and I'm pleased to see it, but we need about 5 or 6 different long strides to be put in to get to where we want to be. So thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curtins, for your view, and I'm sure they'll be greatly received through the review, CDM review. When you think about structure change and resourcing, that will land on our tables at LTP time. So thank you for your commentary. And Speaker?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, like I couldn't have really summed that up any better than Councillor Curtin and myself. But this is just one step, and it's good to see a step being taken, but as the councillor said, there's many more to go. And I've seen exactly the same kind of feedback and response around the inadequacy of the response when it was needed, and the desire for localism in the response to come back, so people to take back some control over a response when it's needed in an emergency, because people were there and they were waiting and no one came, and they don't want that to happen again. So I also look forward to the multiple steps still required to see the change. Thank you.
Thank you. In a more positive note, I'd also like to thank those communities who did stand up and were able to support their communities in the response. Thank you. So if there are no further comments, happy to receive the paper, the recommendations with addition from Councillor Curtin. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Moving on to item 10, report and recommendations from the Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy Joint Committee.
And Chair, I'm going to hand over to Katrina
to
take you through this item.
I'll apologise. Normally you would have the wise and experienced Gavin. You've got me.
So let's see how well I can do for Gavin. Hastings District Council meeting, or the Future Development Strategy Committee, Joint Committee, met last week, 11th of July, to consider the next phase of that piece of work, which was consideration of objectives and issues and options for the future development strategy. At that joint committee meeting, it was agreed to circulate that report to all the respective councils for their adoption or recommendation approval. However, and I say however, Hastings District Council met to discuss that issue yesterday, and or the day before, Gavin received a phone call from an HDC colleague advising us that at their workshop, Hastings District Council have asked for matters to be amended in the issues and options papers. As a consequence, they will not endorse the I&O report as currently drafted. And I'm just going to explain what those changes are. From the workshop, it was apparent that HDC will be suggesting changes, particularly in terms of how possible greenfield growth areas are indicated on the maps. You'll note that they are sort of a round green notation on that map, and how that they're described in the text. The exact details of those amendments are not available in time for this meeting today. So public engagement proposals are asking to be deferred slightly 4 to 6 weeks to allow space for the cyclone recovery land classification conversations to also wind up. And then they will be, HDC will consider public engagement proposals and revised draft issues and options paper at the meeting on the 10th of August. So the issue with that is that those changes will need to be made by HDC. We don't have an opportunity today to see those, obviously. So whatever changes we adopt here or recommend here today would also then need to be incorporated, and we end up in this circular process of an issues and options paper being amended by different councils, having to go through meeting cycles again and again. So to avoid the circular refer backs, I'm recommending that potentially a way of addressing that. We have obviously 2 members on that committee plus an alternate, both Councillor Williams, Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Sears, that I ask could potentially a way to circuit break that be to provide a delegation to those 3 councillors to deal with any amendments that come through. So that's 2 things. One, you've got the issues and options paper before you to consider, and in addition, knowing that the council, Hastings District Council, have made changes yesterday. Hopefully, I have not confused the matters too greatly.
No, thank you, Katrina. Okay, questions or clarifications on the 2 main issues here, which is the proposal for a circuit breaker in terms of the terms of reference by delegating decision-making to our representatives, and the second, questions, clarifications that you have for Katrina on the I&O part of the paper.
Mm-hmm.
I can probably speak to that a bit, Chair. I mean, Councillor Williams and myself and Councillor Sears have attended these meetings. It's a hell of a lot of work gone into it, and there's a heck of a lot of constraints, really, to the sorts of things that we want to achieve. But they've done a pretty good job of arriving at an appropriate stage with it now. We're talking about a consultative document. We're not nailing our colours to the mast on anything. It's really something that provides a platform for discussion, first stage discussion with the public. And so in that context, I'm comfortable with proceeding along the lines of Katrina's suggestion, which is to say that responsibility for managing amendments falls with councillor Williams and myself, or councillor C as necessary.
Councillor Harding?
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I just endorse what Councillor McIntosh has said. Look, I think we can be somewhat relaxed about the process at this issues and options stage. I'm not sure we can be so relaxed about the content of it and the overall tone. And I'm deeply frustrated in reading this report on two fronts. One is that it does only look at Napier and Hastings. So there is no regional planning in here, and in a climate change context, our planning ought to be regional. And I understand we will get to that at some stage, but we're not here yet. And so we fail when we fail to plan regionally, particularly in a climate change context. The other thing is it has very low ambition and comes from a skewed perspective when it comes to protecting highly productive land. I read it as a lot of hand-wringing about why we can't do this, that and the other, why we can't intensify. And at the end of the day, from the perspective of the writers and the perspective of councils who are incentivised to grow their populations and grow their rating database, they default to the easiest way to do that is to find more greenfields. It's not, it cannot carry on this way. Have to be strong, have to have stakes in the ground, have to move on and find better ways to do things that don't involve losing more productive land. Thank you. I believe that is a message that needs to go from this council back to the future development strategy team.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Martin, Councillor Sears, you're happy to take that message back to the joint committee?
Through you, Chair, I think we just need to address the one point about it only focusing on Hastings and Napier. If I may, we are bound by legislation in order to do that at this point in time. The future development strategy is about the national policy statement for urban development. Those two urban centres trigger the need for a future development strategy. There is some pushing of those boundaries as much as possible. You are correct that in terms of a regional approach, that is needed, but this is not the process for that. In terms of the changes that Hastings District Council sought yesterday was to explicitly identify on the plan those areas that have already been identified in our Hiritonga Plains Urban Development Strategy as future growth areas, because that is not quite clear on the map. So those new green areas or future growth in the greenfield growth areas that have been identified in HPUDs, they are required to be demonstrated more clear on the plan. And ultimately, the intent is, in any issues and objectives paper, is to be somewhat provocative, and then you get community feedback. And so I think that is somewhat part of the plan.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Look, support everything that my colleagues have said. I just wanted to speak firstly to the process point. In essence, the recommendation that stands is simply to receive the report and provide feedback to the staff. But the recommendation from the committee was that the respective or member organisations actually endorse the policy, or the I&O paper, I should call it. So I think for the reasons Councillor McIntosh shared, I'm not sure what the form of recommendation would need to be, but if this council is happy to delegate to Councillor McIntosh and I to effectively provide that endorsement back to the committee of the final form of the report, happy to do so. I just want to reiterate some of the, and I guess flesh out a little bit, some of the challenges that Councillor Harding and Councillor McIntosh have touched on. The reality is that there are, when you combine liquefaction, tsunami, seismic risk, productive soils, areas of cultural significance, landscape, stormwater inundation, flooding, you really start to ask the question, can you at all accommodate an additional 6,000 houses in Napier? One of the intensification areas is in very low-lying land around Riverbend Road. The reality in Auckland has been that the communities there have really, really pushed back on intensification. But I think we as regional leaders need to be very strong in leading this conversation and saying, well, we've got a housing crisis, we've particularly got an affordable housing crisis, and we're elected to do a job here, and we need new housing. So it's going to be, I'm afraid, an intensification paradigm. That's literally what it's going to come down to. The question is where, in sensible terms from infrastructure, stormwater in particular, it is safe and sensible to do that. So I'd endorse the feedback to the staff as recommendation 3 is that we put lead in the pencil around leading a conversation on the need for intensification and protecting our productive soils in particular. But let's just be honest that if we're not going to do that, what will that mean for places we might cherish as a landscape or for cultural significance? So there's no easy wins here, apart from, quite frankly, as Councillor Harding touched on, and you would get there with an eventual broader structure plan exercise, the likes of Central Hawke's Bay. So yes, happy to take the roll on and for a motion to be put that the final endorsement of this committee, of this council, of the I&O paper rest with Councillor McIntosh and I and alternate Councillor Sears. But with that strong and bold message around the need to intensify, going back into the content of this document. Thank you.
Thank you, and we've got that noted as recommendation 4. So if there are no other questions and you're happy to move those recommendations with the added. Oh, sorry, Tanya Hotman, sorry.
Kia ora. Yeah, I think I attended the meeting as well, and I note Councillor Williams' comments, and you know, from the perspective of whānau who have been massively hit in terms of one of those risks, which is obviously flooding. I do think we need to take care in balancing what risks we are prepared to accept in areas that we will want to develop. That's just my concern, is just, yeah, these are hard decisions. We're going to have to look closely at what we do. I'm just concerned about the providing guidance for whānau who want to have homes and their expectations that where councils might indicate development is appropriate, that gives them a sense of assurance or safety that it's okay to build in those areas or live in those areas. So I always worry about the appetite for risk and how that's communicated to those who are going to be at risk. And I think it's really important in these plans that we highlight that and that we do our best to avoid that. I fully appreciate that you can't avoid all risks. I'm not sure there's a place in New Zealand where you can avoid all risks, but it's about what risks are reasonable to take when you're putting families at stake. So that's my main concern. The thing that was raised at the hui was whether there was enough information and focus around those who are particularly vulnerable and in need of housing, and the growth of population, particularly Māori population in the under 30s. All of our PSGs could attest to that fact. I'm not sure that was really well reflected in the report. it was mentioned, but one of the key themes that came out in the report that was highlighted was the need for aged care facilities. Well, aged care facilities, but the ageing population and the need to provide for them, which is all of us actually. But I'm also mindful that at the other end, for our Māori population and probably our Pacific, I would hazard a guess that they too are deserving of some focus in these reports, because they are a young and growing population, which is quite significant in our region. So I don't know that I don't think the report did enough around those issues affecting Māori or around the demographics of Māori and the big growth of Māori in the under 30s. So I'm just raising that as something for us to keep an eye on.
Kia ora, thank you, Tony. I have a mover, Councillor Williams, and a seconder, Councillor McIntosh. If there are no more speakers, put it to the table. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. So we move on to item 11, the terms of reference for the review of the performance of HBRC's flood scheme assets and river management programs in response to Cyclone Gabrielle. So we have been presented with the draft terms of reference back in April, but this is an opportunity to bring forth the final, as well as any changes and an update on the progress of that panel. So kia ora, Nick.
Through you, Chair. Councillors, when you delegated the ability for the interim chief executive to complete the terms of reference, the main change really has been to widen the terms of reference from schemes to river management. So for people in Tangoio or Esk or Wairoa, where there wasn't currently a scheme but will need to be listened to and heard through this process, that begins to wrap them more broadly into the terms of reference. The other critical elements to this have been to make sure that this is an independent process, so it's at arm's length to the regional council, and the panel is very clear on that. So whilst we will provide some administrative support, the panel will do its own thing. In setting up the panel, there were really three critical elements. The first is that there needed to be skills on that panel from a Te Ao Māori worldview and perspective. And Bernadette Araperi brings that to the panel. Secondly, that the panel has some technical flood type experience, and Kyle Christensen fulfills that brief. And Council had already requested that it be chaired by an experienced resource management planner, and that's Phil Mitchell. Because this is a process that is going to occur at arm's length to the panel, what we have been at pains to do with the panel is to give them some context for the region and how busy both those affected communities are, how busy mana whenua are. So the panel have got that ahead of them. The panel's next step is to work with the various people that they want to talk and engage with, including mana whenua, around how they best want to do that. And that will all be done at arm's length to the regional council. At this stage, the panel is looking to report back at the end of January, but noting, I think, in their early stages that they've got to design and work with those various entities on what the engagement process will look like, that they want to get that right so that people's voices are heard and don't want to rush it at the expense of process. So the panel will keep us updated on progress. There's clearly some urgency to get to a resolution of their findings, but they need to get the process right at the beginning. That little tension will play out as we go along. So really, this is an information item to say this is now a live inquiry. The panel has made a first introductory visit to the region, which is really to understand the extent of flooding. They've met with Piri and We'll then be seeking to talk to PSGE's Marae and Mana Whenua on their next steps, engage with primary sector groups and those who've been directly affected by the flooding process. So that's going to be the next month, is working out how they best do that. From there, they'll get into the real nitty-gritty of the review.
Thank you, Nick. Questions, clarifications? Thank you, Councillor Sears.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief Executive. The end of January is the date for the final report, and I understand there's a lot of work for the panel in terms of community engagement across multiple levels. But I'm aware also there'll be a lot asked of our internal staff to feed into this. Is there enough time in here allowed for and enough staff capacity to be able to fulfil that within the timeframe? Have we considered that within the terms of reference?
We have. What we've said to the panel is that from the community's perspective at the moment, the absolutely critical issue is resolving those land categorisation issues. So that will remain our priority. If that means the panel takes a month longer, then so be it, because I think we have to deal with the community more urgently.
Thank you. May I ask a supplementary? Will the panel itself be setting up communications and an email or a website or a way in which people can engage in that directly rather than through regional council, looking at the independents?
Yes, so that those discussions are underway. We have a job to support it, but it not to be an HBRC email or portal, really, because that independence is really important. We're still working through the detail of that, so happy to come back to you as to where that ends up.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Just a small thing and then a brief comment, both I think are reasonably important. I think, could we please put Doctor before Phil Mitchell? That may seem like a small thing, but I think it's important to understand that we're dealing with someone who's got quite considerable, in fact, I'd say unrivaled experience and status effectively within the planning community. He's also got an engineering degree, and it's, I think, appropriate just to record that as part of the terms of reference. Just reiterate that the most important things for me are independence around this, and I believe we're all assured as councillors that that's how this is going to operate, but equally community voice and the opportunity for those groups that have been affected and engaged with since to get directly in front of this review panel and to share their stories. That's most important to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any other speakers? Councillor Foley.
Thanks, Chair. Just a point of clarification first around what we're actually reviewing, and going back to what Nick was referring to right at the start, as well as schemes, and mentioned a couple of rivers there, but they do fall within, I guess, rivers or areas we're responsible for. So what I'm saying is it's not all in every river in Hawke's Bay, because there, and I just raised the point that there's a lot of rivers that we don't look after or control, but are out of control and causing a lot of damage out there. And so we need to, I know there's going to be a lot of, or there is a lot of query around, if people living or own land alongside these rivers that we aren't responsible for, how do they become part of a scheme? Because they sort of suddenly want to be, because they would like some help and assistance. So I know that's not going to be fallen as part of this program of work, but something we need to consider, how we answer those people as well. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Just a question for Nick to get a scope issue on the public record, and it's the question of whether the Havelock North streams are included in this review or not. And you read clause 1, and on its face, those schemes are not regional council owned and operated flood protection, and they're not river management either. So we're just seeking the assurance and clarification for the public record that the Havelock North schemes are within scope.
And happy to do that with the panel and come back to Councillor Harding. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, could I please have a mover and a seconder to receive this information item? Councillor Sears and Councillor Williams, would you like to speak any further? No other speakers? No? All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Myself, Dr. Nick and Councillor Roadley will take our leave, so enjoy the rest of your meeting. Councillor Foley.
Thank
over.
you,
Thank you.
Chair, and enjoy your trip, everyone. Look forward to your reports when you get back.
Pages of them.
And how much fun you've had.
Thank you.
So we'll just carry on. We've got a couple more items to go. Just our regular regional council meeting slots. First one, strategic projects. So I guess just if we've got any questions from the table, and we'll get the relevant staff member to come up and answer. Does anyone got any questions? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I had this is on the significant strategic projects report.
Correct.
Item 1, I had a communication from a member of the Bayview community about the land category reviews, effective community feedback, and the process of ground truthing and recategorisation, as to whether there was follow through and closure and feedback in turn from council staff to those people who are adding input to that process. And I'm just wondering if that process could be explained in simple terms to us as to how that is working on the ground within the capacity and resources of the organisations involved.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm happy just to walk through the process. So obviously we've issued preliminary maps, and we have a process which by if people think those maps aren't correct, they can write to us and through their local council or directly to us, outlining the reasons why. We have a weekly review cycle when we go through all of those requests, and then respond with the outcome of the review. We also have PDP alongside us as part of that review process as well, and then we will respond. So where we can respond straight away, we do. If it's tied up in a larger change, we might withhold that notification until the total change is done. If there are any specific instances where that hasn't occurred for an individual, I'm happy to find out the details of who that individual is and follow it up with the team.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate what a gargantuan exercise it is, but I have had feedback from the Bayview community in particular that people within Land 3 who have given feedback haven't had any response in terms of what's come back from the council. And market perception is reality, no doubt. So it's just very keen to ensure that there is closure.
Yep.
And that those who have some input to the system do receive a response with reasons, so they are assured that they've been heard in that process.
So we are trying very hard to make sure we've got a good process that's documented, that's had legal review. And so if there's any specific concerns you have, we can talk about the individual outside of this session.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Sears.
Oh, I had a question on something else.
Sorry.
That is in the paper. It's to do with the issue of, actually no, I'll save it for the next item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sears.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. A question on number 10 on transport choices. Funding of 1.39 million for upgrading bus stops. So I was just interested in that and how much of that could be allocated to bus services or some of the other projects we've been talking around transport, or is this very specifically tied actually to building of new bus shelters?
Through you, Chair, it is specifically for a program called Transport Choices and only for infrastructure projects, which of course Hawke's Bay Regional Council doesn't normally get involved in the infrastructure side of it, but we have on this occasion applied for the funding to implement electronic signage at some of our most frequented bus stops. And no, we can't divert the funding to any services. It is specific.
Just to follow up, Chair, if that's all right. So could the shelters be multi-use? I'm thinking electric bike charging, or other parts of the kind of alternative transport from cars sort of support?
We are working with, obviously, largely Hastings District Council and Napier City Council to identify which bus shelters will be upgraded or implemented. But I don't think we've got enough money to do substantial changes. It is largely for the electronic signage so that you will be able to track your bus where it is coming, when it is coming.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, sorry, Chris might need to bounce back up to the microphone again. I think this is probably one for him. Just a question on the IRG flood control and drainage program, and just whether Chris can add any colour there around what's happening with the Narororo part and how we're going with Kanoa and what he thinks the boundaries of that project might now be.
So I think last month I explained that we've been to see Kanoa and put up a revised program. The key aspects of that program we talked to them about was that some of the projects that we had lined up to be delivered under that Kanoa program would be paused where they were not yet commenced because of the major review of both the Heretaunga and Upper Tukituki schemes. And the key outcome we're looking for as part of that review is how we reconfigure the scheme to deal with a over-design event. So they were very receptive and understood that that was a sensible approach and not to just continue with the program without taking into account new information. We've put up some alternatives and I guess explain the importance, particularly in the Upper Tukituki scheme, of maintaining the gravel extraction subsidy, and we'll continue to fine-tune that program once we learn more from government in terms of the negotiations and what's funded and unfunded and funding gaps and all that sort of stuff. So it's a bit of a moving feast, but the key points are we're in touch. No one's told us to stop doing the work or that Kanoa funding no longer exists, and we just have to demonstrate once we get back on our feet out of response that we can continue that program, albeit it'll look slightly different, but it will still provide good value in terms of upgrading our flood infrastructure. So I think once the dust is settled in terms of funding questions, etc., we can come back and articulate specifically what's on that program.
Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
One for you too, Chris. Heretaunga water storage, does that remain on track as described in the paper? Looking at page 85 here in terms of landowner engagements, site visits for councillors, etc.
Yes, so that is continuing, and so we're bringing I think a bit of a decision back to council in September around continuing progress with that particular project, and so there is a site visit. Is it tomorrow or today? Tomorrow, I think.
Site visit for us in early September.
There's a site visit tomorrow as well for other stakeholders. So I've maybe got it confused as to which site visit is which. But that project is continuing more or less on track, knowing that it is coming to council for a decision about how we move forward.
Any
move receive the paper?
Yeah, great. So we've got a mover. It was seconder. Councillor Sears. All those in favour?
Aye.
So we'll quickly move on to significant activities through August. And once again, take questions.
Just before Chris runs away, Chair, I had an interesting one raised with me by a gentleman who works in the I'd say the horticultural sector, and was inspecting a stop bank adjacent to an orchard property owned by the company he works for, and peered over the stop bank and noticed, as we all have, a large body of silt sitting within the riverbanks. And the comment to me was, why is the council spending so much time clearing silt off private land? Shouldn't it be clearing all the silt out of the rivers first? And I said, well, there's all sorts of probably different views about that and relative priorities, but that we had conversations around the accumulation of gravel affecting future flood performance, but I hadn't heard a question raised about silt deposited within the riverbanks potentially affecting future flood performance on the Archimedes principle. And just wondered if there was some comment on that. Is it something that's in the program to remove silt from within the riverbanks? Is that going to be left to the rivers to deal with? Does it matter? Your thoughts, Chris?
So in terms of deposition of material in the channel, whether it's gravel or silt, it's the same story. So we need to carefully manage those levels to ensure that we deliver the nameplate capacity of the scheme. So there is capacity for some gravel and some silt to be in the system. It's not like it needs to be a squeaky clean, exact channel. And there's natural points where it's more important than other locations where we have plenty of capacity within the channel. So our response is to survey the entire river scheme this year to make really clear decisions on where it needs to be removed from, and to make sure we can prioritise that. Right. Obviously, there's massive volumes. We wouldn't want to launch into removing all silt from every part of the river. That would just be a humongous, expensive and very long-winded exercise. So it's finding out where it needs to be taken, working with industry. We know there's demand for silt within industry for earthworks, just as with gravel, and it's matching industry up with where it needs to be taken out. We just need time. We've had high river levels off and on for the past few months. To complete that survey, do the analysis, and that will drive the works program.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Councillor Lambert.
Just on that subject, Chris, so is this actually funded through targeted rates or individual flood schemes? Or?
So in terms of our response and recovery, we're working with the finance team to work out the best mechanisms. So some of it's insurance, some of it's recovery, some of it's through the targeted rate schemes. But we've got to work out, and I guess we'll be having a further discussion on this. We're still working through the issues, so to give you a definitive answer on how each thing is being funded, I can't do that today.
Well, let's go specifically to is it the Makara Dam or all the dams that come down through?
So to the Makara Dam. So in terms of the Makara Dam, some of that silt excavation out of one of those dams, we want to use the government silt funding, because that's a huge amount of silt. So that's an example where we're using some of that Crown funding to deal with that silt issue on the regional council's infrastructure. So in that specific example, some is funded by the scheme, some is funded by the Crown. If there is an overrun or under recovery, we're working with the finance team to work the best way to fund that.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, probably for Ian, number 57, the impact assessment survey that was conducted in April, May. It's a question, Ian, from Councillor Roadley. Her concern is that that the information that was collected during April and May may not be representative due to the pressure and the workload that farmers were under at that time, engaged in their business as a result of the cyclone and weather. And that as time's gone on, they've probably a much better understanding now of the needs and therefore planning required. And then if that was kind of accepted as a fact or a reality or something that needs to be considered, her question is there an opportunity to update the data to better reflect the changes that may be needed?
Through you, Chair, look, I think it's a good point. The April-May data is useful at the point in time it was collected. The work that Sense Partners will do, my recollection of the discussion is that they will give some consideration to kind of its validity and the fact that it's now dated information and what we do next. But the reality is collecting that data is no simple task. It was quite a big exercise to collect it. I think it will give us a useful point in time. Maybe the time is right towards the end of the winter when people have had a more fulsome opportunity to survey their farm and fully understand the impacts across the farm platform. That would be a better time to go back around and look at it. Usefully, we've got a methodology and an agency that's well versed in what we're trying to do to quickly reassess and reevaluate the data. So I think the answer is yes, but not right now.
Excellent, thank you.
I've got a question for you, Emily, there. When we go public on suggesting we'll do something, the phone doesn't stop about when, how and what. And so point 51, Chilean needlegrass program review in August. Can you elaborate a bit more just so I can respond to the contacts about what's happening in that space?
Yep. So the person who's going to do the work for us is away until the end of this month. So as soon as they're back from their overseas expedition, we will be finalising the scope and engaging them to do the work. The review effectively is there's been already 2 go-rounds on CNG. One is we had a Section 17A review done by this person, Kim Collins. Across Section 17A review of our whole biosecurity program, which included Chilean needlegrass. I then asked them to do a more sort of fulsome examination of the CNG program. That resulted, you may recall, in us scaling up the resources to go into that program to do more surveillance and survey work. So we effectively said, actually, you're not effectively applying the resource required at the time, bearing in mind this was several years ago, to give the program any chance of success. So we scaled up the resource. I'm asking him to come back now and say, in the context of what's happened regionally with the cyclone and the impacts on the land and this plant pest and its propensity to have seeds that survive and endure for extended periods of time, is this a plant pest that we are able to effectively manage in the way that the regional pest management plan sets out for us, or do we need to take a different approach? And that approach could range anywhere from, the answer to that question could range anywhere from a yes, you've got an ability to do something and it looks like this, through to no, actually you need to fundamentally change the way you're looking to control it, or potentially not attempt to control or pass control over to back to landowners. So it's a broad look at the program, given where we're at, given the effect of the cyclone, given where we are now likely to be positioned with the spread of this plant pest, what's a sensible way of looking to manage it going forward?
So just to follow up to that, presumably that report will come back to council for a decision to be made about what we might do going forward.
So if there's an indication that things need to change, we would come back to you and explain why and what's being proposed, with one distinct possibility being a recommendation for us to change, to do another partial plan change of our regional pest management plan to change the plant's status or proposed management approach.
Okay, and so when do you think that might come back to council?
Look, it's difficult to give you an exact date until we've clarified, confirmed the scope and the contractor started the work. He said he's available to start immediately. He returns in August. So definitely before the end of this calendar year, we'll be in the position of clarity about what, as staff, we think we would recommend to you, and hopefully you've made some decisions and we're moving on with it.
Yep, okay, that's great, thank you. I've got, Councillor Van Beek, no? I've got another question for Chris, if everyone else is, how you, no?
Finish with me?
Yeah, I have finished, thank you. You can decide whether it's Central Hawke's Bay or cyclone response, Chris, but I'll speak to the Makaratu River site, but I could be speaking to multiple sites. And now here's just immediately downstream from the Highway 50 bridge. Here's a landowner that queried maintenance pre-cyclone, possibly 12 months, even more going back, and says, you know, that nothing was done and had the subsequent damage from the cyclone, and probably actually had more damage from, I think it's up to 3 heavy rain events we've had down that way now, and quite a lot of threat to infrastructure. You know, probably the highest being the main gas line coming from Taranaki through to Hawke's Bay, and then some CHP District Council assets. My question is, you know, we've had engineer and staff down there and regular contact with Joe Kennett, although I don't think he answers the phone now, but why do these things take so long? You know, particularly when we've got key lifeline infrastructure assets, like I've stated, at risk. You know, how do we get some action done quicker? Because each next rain event, there's more damage getting done, and it's getting harder and more costly to fix.
So it's simply size and scale. So this organisation has sized its various departments around the normal workload, and that would be a sensible thing to do. However, we've had a cyclone that's impacted all of our infrastructure from one end of the region to the other, and also providing significant technical advice into all of those river areas that aren't directly controlled, but people want some help. So our resources are stretched very thin. We have over 800 damaged assets, and each person or community I talk to wants to be at the centre of our response. We simply cannot centre everyone who needs help at the beginning of the queue. And so part of our job is to make those tough choices around what the priorities are. Also, we need good designs. We need the right equipment. We need to engage contractors. So where we whip in and do a temporary works, we know that that's not going to be as good as when we have the right skill set, design and intervention, and build it. And we saw the impact that cyclone had on $1.5 million worth of work upstream of the State Highway 50 bridge. It probably saved the State Highway 50 bridge in the cyclone, but it wasn't enough to save it afterwards. And it's simply size and scale. We cannot be everywhere at once, and the team are working through really hard. First, it was providing safety to life and major infrastructure. So that's why we patched up all of our existing stock banks really quickly. And that feat is probably recognised around New Zealand as actually an exceptional speed. We need to get to all the other things, and we need to understand any changes to return periods and things like that. And then we also need to strengthen our infrastructure going forward. So that third part, which is strengthening infrastructure or looking at better solutions, will take us 10 years to complete. So to manage expectations. We know that the roading network in Hawke's Bay will take 10 years to repair. It's not substantially different for a lot of our rivers. We will be in there for years repairing them. So it's size and scale, and we can't be everywhere all at once, and the whole sector's really busy. So all of the consulting engineers are all flat out, and we're trying really hard to say, we need you to do all this work. We need you to do it all in parallel. We can't do a study for one community and tell another community that they have to wait 18 months to even start the infrastructure review. And that's the discussions our team are having all of the time. And it's a big ask.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, like, there's no doubt the stop bank, response was great, and there was talk about 17 pods, I think, at its peak. But it sounds like a lot of those have been stood down now, though. So it seems like there would be spare capacity out there. In this instance, the landowner is a earth-moving contractor and has his own gear, but too scared to go in there for fear of being told off. It just feels like we've made the process so drawn out, having to go through so many hands, as opposed to guys on the ground with local knowledge that have lived or worked in that area all their lives and have some pretty good ideas themselves. But and perhaps 10, 20 years ago in the council of the old days, would have got stuck straight in. But
there's different views on that, because some of those people are coming to us saying, I've been asked to make decisions I'm not happy with. I don't feel I have the skill sets. I feel I'm being put out and I'm at risk. So there's two ways to look at some of that. And it's not as simple. Everyone also has designated roles. And so it's not as simple as saying, the head of the works group in a particular location is now in charge of all the engineering decisions around river control, because that's unfair on those people. They don't want to be put in that position. Sometimes the community would like to be in that position, but it's not always fair to have those people in that position, and it exposes us to risk. So we're about doing things the right way. We're about doing things to a good quality standard, and we're looking to do things that are enduring. We'll do temporary works where we can. We also need to prioritise across the whole region, and that's why we've gone to great efforts to look at all of our 800 assets and go a little bit slowly at first, but then we can rapidly go in and execute that work and not just jump at the squeaky wheels or a couple of issues and jump around all over the place, but have a controlled way in which we know where we're spending the money, we're spending it in the right place, we're getting good standard results, we're getting the right skill sets in, and we're being fair with all of our staff about the decisions we ask them to make.
Thank you. Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, I'll just take advantage of your good nature again, Chris.
Yeah.
It's good to see in the report that they've started work on the new Hawke railway drain.
Yep.
Because as you know, that one little drain caused the school to be flooded, and that school's been closed since then. It's taken refuge in the Latter-day Saints Church Hall and Presbyterian Church Hall and St. Joseph's School, and it's still looking for a home because it's still, How did all that damage get caused by one drain? That's what this community is still asking itself. How can they stop that from happening in the future?
Yep. So, look, part of that is maintenance, and we've been working with Wairau District Council to understand the different pieces of that puzzle, and there are different pieces of that puzzle with each organisation, and we've been up there to do some work as well. One of the fundamental parts is the levels of service. So a drain only typically provides a 1 in 5 year level of service. And so even our flood control provides a 1% AEP. So everything has a level of service, and sometimes those levels of services are exceeded. And I think what this event has uncovered, which is obvious on one hand, but not when you don't have frequent events, is a lot of the areas, Hawke's Bay and a lot of the areas is in a floodplain. So there are risks in major rainfalls. Drains do have relatively low levels of service, so people probably need to take that into account in some of their planning around some of these events. we can do the best we can, but ultimately a drain will only have a relatively low carrying capacity.
It's happened to a lot of drains in Wairoa, and a lot of the people point out the ownership. Some drains owned by the district council, some are owned by the railway in this case,
Yep.
and others are owned by transport.
Yep.
So would it make sense that we do them all or something, and make sure the maintenance is done up anyway, or?
Yeah. So look, I think you raised some good questions. I don't necessarily have the answers to should one organiser operate all drains. I think certainly where there's problems, like we know in Napier, in terms of the shared ownership, we're addressing that. But a lot of the funding is complicated too, through Waka Kotahi, through transport, and through us and through stormwater. So look, you raised some good points. I haven't got the answer to the one best organisation to manage all the drains.
The fundamental issue for people on the ground is they can see what's wrong, but they go to report it, but they don't know who to report or what the channel of command or channel of communication is.
Yep.
Yeah, even if we made Wairoa District Council the centre for the reports, then they'd know who to put it off to.
So it is challenging, I agree.
It really is, yeah.
Any further questions? No? Oh, Councillor Harding.
Yeah, Chair, not so much a question as an observation and maybe a request of Chris. And just in the context of this body of work that needs to be done over an extended period of time, we're talking years, right? So just as we develop the systems to get into that work, the prioritisation, the more we can make that information and that the work program accessible, the easier it's going to be for all of us that field the questions. And so it's just a matter, I think we've got some bones for that, we've got a map of work and plan, progress, that sort of thing, and drains maintenance. I think if we could aim to step that up and have it more informative and have maybe some timeframes built into that, then that would relieve the pressure, I think, on a lot of people.
So it's worth pointing out that we were working on our enterprise asset management system, and that is to have a cohesive end-to-end process around asset management and supported through IT and mobile computing. So we could have paused that coming into the cyclone. We've actually accelerated it, and the reason we've accelerated it is we didn't want to put our biggest ever work program in our old work systems that sort of were okay, but didn't have some of the good reporting, etc., that we'd want. So the team have been really fast-tracking that enterprise asset management, and our vision is that all of that new work can be fed through the new system so that we can update all of our records and really use this event as an opportunity to give asset management a real good birthday in that regard. And hopefully we'll get some good reporting and we can demonstrate via maps where work is planned for the next 3 months, or what work's been complete, what percentages is not complete, and all that sort of stuff. And we've really got to share that work around the region, but also working on the priorities in each sort of part of the region as well.
It's fantastic to hear. Thank you.
If that's it, we'll look to wrap that up. Anyone want to move that we accept that report? Thank you, Councillor Williams. A seconder, Councillor McIntosh. You don't want to speak? All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. And I think that wraps us up. Do we have any minor items? I don't think we did we? So that wraps us up. So why don't we finish with a karakia? Kia tau, kia katoa, te atawhai o te atu, me te araha o te atua, te whiwhina tangatanga, kia te wairu tapu, ake, 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 āmine.
Kia ora.